For tonight's class, we're going to be kind of a continuation from last week's class, where Scott talked about some different diets, and we're going to talk about some other diets, and we're going to try to answer your questions, which we'll do this week, and then we'll be able to do that again next week to even go into more depth. Now, there was someone who said that she couldn't speak, not able to talk, will be listening. Thank you. I found out about the classes from Peace Health emails. Well, Gina, thank you for coming. We're happy to hear that. Someone asked me if we're planning on going back and doing these sessions live. And Peace Health, I was doing these sessions, I think, for 2 or 3 months just before the pandemic hit. The pandemic hit and we no longer did the sessions at the annex. But my plan is to reach out to Peace Health again, get some space time from them, and reinitiate the live classes, still keeping the Zoom class intact. I'd probably do the classes on a weekend at the annex, Saturday, Sunday, something like that. So that's what our thought process is. Scott, I see you made it. You just muted right now, but glad.
There we go.
Yeah, it makes a difference. A little reboot, and you're back in.
Yeah, it just wouldn't, I couldn't hear you guys. It was just totally, could you hear me when I first logged in?
We couldn't hear you. We could see you wave, and we could see that you were a little confused there, but.
Yeah, first time that's happened. I don't know, the computer just wasn't loading Zoom, and whatever reason.
The wonders of technology keep
Yeah.
us continually on edge sometimes.
Hey guys, can I say hi to George? Hey George.
Of course.
Hey.
Say hello, Ken.
Is George Heck, are you new to this or have you done this before?
Well, I usually watch the meetings recorded a few days later just because of other things that are going on. So I've been kind of looking into this for quite a while and working on it. And I got started with David Sinclair, who wrote a book called Longevity. He's a Harvard professor, and he's a big believer in what you can do to maximize your lifespan. And eventually that sent me to various other names and books and videos. And so eventually I wound up here.
Interesting pathway. But we're glad to have you, and glad that you have a neighbor here who knows you also. Any other thoughts from anybody? Anybody who's new who wants to speak up and say who you found out from and why you're here?
Yeah, I'm Doug. I've sat in on a couple of your programs before. I don't know, history of my wife. She had carpal tunnel syndrome, had a surgery, corrected the problem. As a result, had horrible inflammation. She's an avid cyclist. She can no longer cycle. Her hands are swollen. She couldn't use the brakes, and she gained some weight. She injured her knee, went to see the doctor, and the doctor told her she had to lose weight. And she got on through Kaiser into this whole food plant-based. And as a result, I did, although I'd eat what she prepared, and then I'd add fish or chicken or whatever. But anyway, I had an older brother had abdominal aortic aneurysm, had one surgery and then had another surgery to correct the first surgery, and then had a second or third one to correct the first and second surgeries. And I mentioned to my doctor, and so she ran a test on me. It was okay. 3 years later, ran another test. I'd gone from 2 to 3 centimeters. And I just had one about a week ago, a third test, and I'm waiting for the results. So anyway, she got me on statins about a year and a half ago. And I started having issues, and I thought I'm 78, thought I was beginning my downhill glide. And then about 6 or 8 months later, I ran across an article listing complications or whatever side effects of statins, and it was what I was experiencing. So I went off, I got better. A few months later, I went back on, repeated, went off, and I went to see my doctor a couple of weeks ago, and she told me I need to get on statins. I said, well, how about if I cut the statin in half and go on the program my wife was on? And she said, that's an excellent idea. And half dosage statin, I'm still having problems. I went off and I'm feeling better. So I'm really committed to trying to do this vegan thing. My wife was on it, and she had good results, but I always wondered, this ballyhoo about not eating beef, and thought is maybe related to environmental issues. Cows are farting and causing greenhouse gas, and there's a bunch of malarkey. But anyway, I'm starting to become a believer. I'm definitely motivated to avoid having that surgery.
Well, welcome to the class. And it seems like you do have a reason, good motivation for making a lifestyle change. And I guess I want to try to reassure you that this is a good decision that you're making for whatever reasons you make it for, whether it's individual health, the health of the world, or the health of animals, actually. And I actually do this for all three reasons myself. But we try to focus on the science for individual health most of the time. And we do have some sessions that may incorporate the effect of what we eat on the planet. We have a session on that. And then we have, that's pretty much it. How our mind influences our health, but the vast majority of these classes are related to what the science connected with health benefits you'll receive. So you have every reason for doing this. Statins, if you haven't had a heart attack or a stroke. Do you know the benefits of statins compared to how many people you need to treat to get one person helped? Have you reviewed that with your doctor?
No.
Yeah, so the statistics, if you look up, do a Google search for number needed to treat, one person out of 104 will have a heart attack or stroke prevented over a 5-year period of time. And so I think it's about 3 or 4 people who will develop some side effects like you have. So you have to kind of weigh the benefits and the risks of statins for those people who have not had a heart attack or a stroke. And you can find that information if you want to look on nutritionfacts.org, Dr. Greger's site, or do Google searches. It's available for you to access. And I know medicine traditionally is pushing statins, and for people who have had heart attacks or strokes, it's definitely of benefit. But for those who have not, the prophylactic aspects are not quite as great as most of us have been led to believe. So
Good to know. Thank you.
you're very welcome. Now, someone has a question about both my twin sister and cousin are nurses, and they always get tired and hungry when they eat starchy veggies, such as potatoes, complex carbs, such as rice. I hear their argument all the time, have been at a loss as to how to respond. Any ideas? So anybody have any thoughts on that? They'd like to respond?
Are they deep frying?
Yeah, so hard to tell.
What was
that
the
is,
question? I'm sorry, I missed that.
the question is your question about
No, what was the person that just spoke? What was her question?
are they fried, deep fried? these
No,
rice?
no, they don't deep fry. And
They don't?
actually, my twin took all these classes at one point.
Uh-huh.
So he knows what I'm doing.
Yeah, so bottom line is some people who get tired and are hungry, they're generally not eating enough calories. So they may be eating too many salads, too much fruit, not enough potatoes, not enough oatmeal, not enough beans, not enough of the foods that are going to be providing with a higher calorie density. So it's good to have a coach. People who've taken these classes don't always have a coach. They may come into these classes and go away with an idea of what they think is the right thing to do. But rather than asking us, hey, coming directly to us and saying we have this problem and letting us review what they're actually eating, they may get frustrated and feel this is not for them. That's sad, but that's the reality. Having a coach can be really helpful, just like people who play tennis or want to learn to play the piano. You can do a certain amount, but you may get frustrated pretty easily. If you have a coach who's helping you along, it can be very beneficial. So that would be my advice to them is, did you do this totally on your own? If you have, even if you've attended the classes, did you at least present this argument to the instructors of those classes to allow them to guide you a bit?
The other aspect too, I'll chip in, is just saying that when a lot of times when people are eating more of the standard American diet and they have lots of insulin resistance, their insulin's not working very well, and then they suddenly start eating, even if it is rice, oats, beans, potatoes, with fruits and vegetables and things, that's suddenly a lot more carbohydrate. And so what happens sometimes to people that have a lot of insulin resistance is then because of that, their blood sugar kind of shoots up a little bit higher than it really should without the insulin resistance. And then because of the over secretion of insulin, they get a big drop in their blood sugar and then they feel really tired. And so that goes away once you kind of get rid of all the red light foods. Once you start getting rid of the foods that are causing the insulin resistance, the meat, the cheese, the eggs, the dairy, the oils, the processed foods, then the insulin starts working well. And then when you eat the potatoes and the beans and the fruits and vegetables, all the foods we're talking about, then your blood sugars don't spike too high and they don't take that dip because of excessive insulin. So that's just another aspect of it that could be contributing.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking. And I wish I could, I'm going to direct them to listen to exactly that response, because I do believe the latter is the case in their situations. So thank you.
You're welcome. Have them watch the diabetes class. I mean, that diabetes class is going to be coming up very soon here, next few weeks. But if they wanted to see it sooner, you can go to the 2021 class archives and watch the 2 classes on diabetes there, and it explains that a little bit.
Thank you.
Next question is, I have osteoarthritis and I'm wondering about cadmium in tofu products. And also, what about eating too much raw spinach? I don't know about the cadmium in tofu products. I don't know that has an effect on our osteoarthritis or not. I haven't, noticed anything. Scott, have you heard anything about tofu and osteoarthritis?
No, I'd have to look it up. I don't know anything about cadmium either, so
so
look it up on nutrition facts.
Yeah, if you have an article or whatever it might be that you want to send us, you can do that. We'll take a look at it, but I just don't know the connection with that. And then also, what about, go ahead.
My arthritis is getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And so today, when I was in my orthopedist office, he was asking me about my diet, and I said I was eating plant-based diet, and he says a lot of tofu, and he said cadmium weakens the bones. So I don't know. I kind of went online, but I don't always trust online what they say.
I've never heard that or read about it or seen it in all the last 10 years. I'm not sure where he got his information from, but I'd like to see the articles that he's using for that argument.
Okay.
Yeah, all I know is that before maybe 50 years ago, there was in Asian countries like Japan and China where they eat lots of tofu, they had little to no osteoporosis, so their bones are just fine. So yeah, I would be pretty suspicious of that.
Okay.
And then what about eating too much raw spinach? Raw spinach, I don't see that there's necessarily a problem unless you have a problem with kidney stones. Spinach has oxalates in it, and too much oxalate could precipitate renal stones or kidney stones. So if you've had a problem with kidney stones, I tell people don't eat over a handful of spinach. And be careful about other oxalate-containing foods like
It's beet greens and Swiss chard.
thank you.
Mhm.
Nice to have the young ones here in the audience too. Appreciate it. So I doubt that you're eating too much raw spinach is a problem. Now, are you taking turmeric for its anti-inflammatory effect? And are you eating totally whole food plant-based because that's the most anti-inflammatory diet that you can eat?
I'm eating 98.5%. I'm not all the way there, but I'm
Yeah.
getting there.
So if your symptoms are worsening, you may want to make the decision to try this all the way for 2 or 3 months and see if it gets stopped in its tracks and you feel better. That's my best thought.
I haven't had a problem, but my nephew is like plant-based guru, reads everything, whatever, and his mom, he tried to get her on and she was eating too much spinach and she got kidney stones. And so then he called me and said, Mom says you're eating too much spinach, stop it. So I thought, I don't think I'm eating too much, but I eat spinach. I like spinach a lot.
Spinach is fine. And the more you can do this 100% and just avoid anything that's processed, just eating the foods as they're grown in nature, the less inflammation you'll have, the better your osteoarthritis will be.
I'm a work in progress.
Okay, that's good. Keep at it. We're here to encourage you. We don't give tickets. We're not policemen. Okay?
Sandra, this is Evie. I would encourage you to, as hard as it is, to go full in to the 100% plant-based. If you're having the inflammation issues, I would encourage you to do it. With my hands, I could not make it. I could not make a fist. I could not in the morning. I couldn't hold a cup. I couldn't brush my teeth. I couldn't do anything. Within 3 weeks of going 100% plant-based, I could do those things again. So
That's
I
after
had,
2 years.
and that was after 2 years of inflammation where I could not use my hands at all. And it was miraculous for me when I went full in and just said, okay, that's it. I'm doing totally plants.
I'm not actually having a lot of inflammation. What I'm having is bone degeneration.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, my knees are just falling apart. Every time I go to the doctor, they're worse.
Now, remember, osteoporosis is not just related to your diet. It's related to the amount of weight-bearing exercise that you're doing, resistance on that, the vitamin D that you're getting, the calcium, those sorts of issues are all involved in this package. It's a group issue. It's not one thing.
Well, I'm working on it.
Okay,
Yeah,
keep
but
working on it.
I slip occasionally, so
Okay.
I'm honest about that.
Yeah, so the thing is we are human, and you're not a bad person for doing something that's not necessarily the healthiest choice. And yet, if you're really having problems and you're worried about it, perhaps listening to those who have done this totally may help you get there also, you know? Who knows? I look upon this as Scott and I, we plant seeds and then they get kind of watered. People come to this class and they get watered a little more. And so some people grow at a little different rate, and some people have different colored flowers or whatever it is. Everybody's a little bit different in this. And we just try to keep encouraging you all, whatever you're able to do. Okay. I guess we're going to stop and do a little diet wars. And then if we have a lot more questions, we're going to take them up next week. We may have some time for questions at the end here, but I want to share my screen and play one of the first videos just because we're in the diet war category. And some of you have heard about all sorts of different diets. Among them might be, hey, eat according to what blood type you are. And that, it sounds good. If you have type A blood, maybe you should eat this certain diet. And the book, I think, reads pretty interestingly, and whoever picked it up and read through it might think this is the right thing to do, just like I thought doing the zone diet was a good thing to do. I didn't really have the nutrition background or information at the time I was doing that. There's lots of other diets, the carnivore diet and the paleo diet and keto diets, and Scott talked about them a bit last week. I want to really go over a little bit more of the paleo diet, which is the low carb type diets, as to what may be the issues with them, because they seem to be so popular and yet they potentially are problematic. And then by the time we end our discussion tonight, after reviewing a lot of the differences why low carb may not be the healthiest, we're going to take a deeper dive into that area. I want to go over this concept of the Mediterranean diet, which is promoted by most people in the medical profession, and do a compare or contrast with the whole food plant-based concept, while we're including maybe vegan diet and making sure that we know the difference between the vegan diet and a whole food plant-based diet, so that you don't get caught up in becoming a junk food plant-based person. That's not the goal of these classes. There are other diets, grain brain, wheat belly. There's a ton of them. They all sound great, but when you actually look at the science, you may come to different conclusion. So let's start out today with the problem with the paleo diet argument. And this is in the low carb diet category. And remember, Scott showed you this video, low carb diets and coronary blood flow, and how people who are on low carb diets after about a year have decreased blood flow to their coronary arteries, and they have a lesser life expectancy. Well, let's listen to the argument about paleo.
Our epidemics of dietary disease have prompted a great deal of research into what humans are meant to eat for optimal health. In 1985, an influential article was published proposing that our chronic diseases stem from a disconnect between what our bodies evolved eating during the Stone Age, during the last 2 million years, and what we're stuffing our face with today, advocating for a return towards a hunter-gatherer type diet of lean meat, fruits, vegetables, and nuts. Though it may be reasonable to assume our nutritional requirements were established in the prehistoric past, the question of which prehistoric past remains. Why just the last 2 million? We've been evolving for 25 million years since our common great ape ancestor, during which our nutrient requirements and digestive physiology were set down, and therefore probably little affected by our hunter-gatherer days at the tail end. So what were we eating for the first 90% of our evolution? What the rest of the great apes ended up eating, 95+% plants. This may explain why we're so susceptible to heart disease. For most of human evolution, cholesterol may have been virtually absent from the diet. No bacon, butter, trans fats, and massive amounts of fiber, which pulls cholesterol from the body. Now this could have been a problem since our body needs a certain amount of cholesterol, so our bodies didn't just evolve to make cholesterol, but preserve it, recycle it. Our bodies evolved to hold on to cholesterol. So if you think of the human body as a cholesterol-conserving machine, and plop it into the modern world of bacon, eggs, cheese, chicken, pork, and pastry, well then no wonder artery-clogging heart disease is our #1 cause of death. What used to be so adaptive for 90% of our evolution, holding on to cholesterol at all costs since we ain't getting much of it in our diet, is today maladaptive, a liability leading to the clogging of our arteries. It seems our bodies just can't handle it. As the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Cardiology noted 25 years ago, no matter how much fat and cholesterol carnivores eat, they do not develop atherosclerosis. You can feed a dog 500 eggs worth of cholesterol and a stick of butter, and they just wag their tail. Their bodies, evolved from wolves, are used to getting, eating, and getting rid of excess cholesterol, whereas within months, a fraction of that cholesterol can start clogging the arteries of animals adapted to eating a more plant-based diet. Even if our bodies were designed through natural selection to eat mostly fruit, greens, and seeds for 90% of our evolution, why didn't we better adapt to meat eating in the last 10% during the Paleolithic? We've had nearly 2 million years to get used to all that extra saturated fat and cholesterol. If a lifetime of eating like that clogs up nearly everyone's arteries, why didn't the genes of those that got heart attacks die off and get replaced by those that could live to a ripe old age with clean arteries, regardless of what they ate? Because most didn't survive into old age, didn't live long enough to get heart attacks. When the average life expectancy is 25, then the genes that get passed on are those that can just get us to reproductive age by any means necessary, and that means not dying of starvation. So the higher the calorie foods, the better. So eating lots of bone marrow and brains, human or otherwise, would be a selective advantage, as would discovering a time machine stash of Twinkies, for that matter. If we just have to live long enough to get our kids to puberty to pass along our genes, then we don't have to evolve any protections against the ravages of chronic disease. To find a population nearly free of chronic disease in old age, we don't have to go back 1 million years. In the 20th century, networks of missionary hospitals in rural Africa found coronary artery disease virtually absent, and not just heart disease, but high blood pressure, stroke, diabetes, common cancers, and on down the list. In a sense, these populations in rural China and Africa were eating the type of diet we've been eating for 90% of our last 20 or so million years, right? A diet almost exclusively of plant foods. Right? How do we know it was their diet that protected them and not something else? Well, in the 25-year update to their original paleo paper, they tried to clarify, look, they did not then and do not now propose that people adopt a particular diet just based on what our ancient ancestors ate. Dietary recommendations must be put to the test. That's why the pioneering research of Pritikin, Ornish, and Esselstyn is so important, showing that plant-based diets can not only stop heart disease, but have been proven to reverse it in the majority of patients. Indeed, it's the only diet that ever has, perhaps because that's what we ate throughout the vast majority of our evolution.
So it seems like there was a black screen across the top and the bottom, a black stripe. I don't particularly see it here. I went from a full screen to share We'll play the next one, see if it's on there. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. Does everybody see that, or is it just Scott? Anyone else speak up?
Oh, he sees it.
I see
On there
it.
now.
All
It's
right.
there
I
now.
see it.
How about now?
Yes, I still see it.
It's still there, but we can
Much of
see
the low
most of
carb
screen,
and
though, so
paleo
okay.
reasoning revolves around insulin.
All right, I don't know what the issue is. I guess we have technology. Because I don't see anything on my screen. It looks pretty good, actually, but what can I say? Okay, we're going to play this next one, which is about paleo diets may negate the benefits of exercise. Let's see what it has to say.
To quote one random blogger, carbohydrates increase insulin, the root of all evil when it comes to dieting and health. So the reasoning goes, because carbs increase insulin, we should stick mostly to meat, which is fat and protein, no carbs, so no increase in insulin, right? Wrong. We've known for half a century that if you give someone just a steak, no carbs, no sugar, no starch, their insulin goes up. Carbs make your insulin go up, but so does protein. In 1997, an insulin index of foods was published, ranking 38 foods on which stimulates insulin levels the most. What do you think causes a larger insulin spike? A large apple and all its sugar, a cup of oatmeal packed with carbs, a cup and a half of white flour pasta, a big bunless burger, no carbs at all, or half a salmon fillet? What do you think? The answer is the meat. Now, they only looked at beef and fish, but subsequent data showed that there's no significant difference between the insulin spike from beef versus chicken or pork. They're all just as high. Thus, protein and fat-rich foods may induce substantial insulin secretion. In fact, meat protein causes as much insulin release as pure sugar. So, based on their own framework, if they really believe insulin is the root of all evil, then low-carbers and paleo folks would be eating big bowls of white spaghetti day in, day out before they'd ever touch meat. Yes, having hyperinsulinemia, too high levels of insulin in the blood, like type 2 diabetics have, is not a good thing. It may increase cancer by like 10%. But if low-carb and paleo people stuck to their own theory, if it's all about insulin, then they would be telling everyone to eat vegetarian. Vegetarians have significantly lower insulin levels, even at the same weight. It's true for ovo-lacto vegetarians. It's true for lacto-vegetarians and vegans. Those who eat meat have up to 50% higher insulin levels. Put someone on a strictly plant-based diet, a man, woman, young, old, skinny, or fat, and you can significantly bring their insulin levels down within just 3 weeks on this kind of healthy vegan diet. And then just by adding egg whites back to their diet, you can increase evil insulin production 60% within 4 days. What if you take people and add carbohydrates, double their carbohydrate intake? You can bring their insulin levels down. Why? Because they weren't feeding people jelly beans and sugar cookies. They were feeding people whole plant foods, lots of whole grains, beans, fruits, and vegetables. What if you put someone on a very low-carb diet, like an Atkins diet? Low-carb advocates assumed that it would lower insulin levels. Dr. Westman here is the new Dr. Atkins, after the old Dr. Atkins died overweight, according to the medical examiner, with a history of heart attack, congestive heart failure, and hypertension. But Dr. Westman was wrong. No significant drop in insulin levels on very low-carb diets. What they got is a significant rise in their LDL cholesterol levels, the #1 risk factor for our #1 killer, heart disease. Now, Atkins is an easy target, though, right? No matter how many extra new Atkins diets that come out, it's still old news. What about paleo? The paleo movement gets a lot of things right. They tell people to ditch dairy and donuts, eat lots of fruits, nuts, and vegetables, cut out a lot of processed junk. But this new study is pretty concerning. Take a bunch of young, healthy folks, put them on a Paleolithic diet along with a CrossFit-based, high-intensity circuit training exercise program. Now, If you lose enough weight exercising, you can temporarily drop your cholesterol levels no matter what you eat. I mean, you can see that with stomach stapling surgery, tuberculosis, chemo, a good cocaine habit. I mean, just losing weight by any means can lower cholesterol, which makes these results all the more troubling. 10 weeks of hardcore workouts and weight loss, and LDL cholesterol still went up. And it was even worse for those that started out the healthiest. Those starting out with really good LDLs, under 70, had a 20% elevation in LDL, and their HDL dropped. Right? Exercise is supposed to boost your good cholesterol, not lower it. The paleo diet's deleterious impact on blood fats is not only significant, but substantial enough to counteract the improvements commonly seen with improved fitness and body composition. Exercise is supposed to make things better. Put people instead on a plant-based diet and a modest exercise program, mostly just walking-based, and within 3 weeks can drop their bad cholesterol 20% and their insulin levels 30%, right, despite the 75 to 80% carbohydrate diet. Whereas the paleo diets appear to negate the positive effects of exercise.
I'm going to try something to see if we can get rid of that black, whatever it is, causing it. What I'll do is I'll exit out of here and try to load on something else. Stop sharing. Any questions about this, anything at this moment in time? Anybody have a thought? I guess, Ken, you were asking a question, would anyone be willing to share their opinions or summation regarding tomatoes and the effect on arthritis? There's been a number of articles about nightshades. I think tomatoes are part of the nightshade group. And again, I don't know, Scott, what's your take on that?
Well, there's, can always be certain people that have food sensitivities, and so tends to what kind of the playbook for that is you tend to find people that do have sensitivities to nightshades, and then you feed them tomatoes, and then that small group of people maybe it showed a little bit of increased inflammation, kind of the same playbook that they used in the grain, brain, and wheat belly, which showed people with celiac disease when they eat gluten, their inflammatory markers go up because they have celiac disease. But in 99% of the population, by just going more whole food plant-based, including tomatoes, you get less inflammation. So it's a good example of the reductionist view that I talked about so much last week. So that's kind of that reductionism versus holism a bit, where a specific food or a specific nutrient in a specific situation where you might find some small studies that show some people that have a certain sensitivity might show a little more inflammation. But I would say in general, for 99% of the population, tomatoes should reduce inflammation.
Okay, hopefully that's helpful for you. I'm gonna try logging back in and do this a slightly different way so that I can see if we can get rid of that black bar, because that's annoying. Even though it's not on my screen, it's on your screens, and I don't want that. So
right now it's just at the bottom, not the one hop is gone as of right now.
And you know what the bottom is? We have this where it records words. So what's that called? Closed captioning. And
that's the closed caption. Okay.
I X'd out one of the closed caption things at the top. And so I guess we're just going to have to live with the closed caption bar at the very bottom if we're going to be doing closed captioning, which I think it's okay to do. All right, here we go. Why do we have problems with so many different diets? One of the reasons is celebrities. And I like Kelly Clarkson. And I wish that she could actually see the science. You remember Scott showed last time the plant paradox video by Dr. Greger about how it's basically the references are nonsense. The references actually demonstrate the opposite of what is claimed in the book. But here you have Kelly Clarkson lost nearly 40 pounds on a plant paradox diet. Here's the book by Stephen Gundry. You saw it last week. And, you know, when she lost 40 pounds, everybody was thrilled. And so they jump on this diet. They think it's great. And that's one of the problems with having celebrities as the main source of your nutrition information. You should probably be pretty careful about using them. Pretty much any celebrity for your health information. And that includes what? Most everyone except Sanjay Gupta, who is one of my celebrities. But even you can hear some fake and false information about him. As we learned that he was promoting a product which apparently he wasn't promoting, but with the fake news in this world, it's hard to know the truth from the false reality. So I want to stop with that. And we're going to go on to the next about why carbohydrate diets are a scam. So let's take a look at this, listen to some of the mentors who we've been following, and then Dr. McDougall has a clip at the end which shares some information. I might not have used the same words he uses, but he tries to impress upon you to look at the authors, the people who are writing these books, look at what they look like and make a decision as to what body type you would like compared to what body type they are. So let's take a look.
You've been formidable and outspoken about low-carb doctors. I want to talk about their motives. Do you believe these people have a lack of integrity, or are they just misinformed?
At a certain point, it doesn't really matter, right? Whether they're doing it just to sell books, or they're doing it because they deluded themselves into thinking that this is true and they haven't really looked at the science. Either way, what they're doing is they're harming people.
I've often wondered why it is that some people are so wedded to the idea of low carb. And they'll say you should really have a steak. And it forces them into all kinds of rationalizations, like cholesterol doesn't matter, I guess saturated fat doesn't matter, and the links with heart disease and Alzheimer's disease, let's try to discount them. It puts them in a tough spot. And I'm really not quite sure where that motivation comes from.
The rationale would be, well, look, yeah, maybe the low-carb diet isn't really health promoting, and maybe it isn't that good of a thing, but it's better than the alternative. And plus, it's what people want, and that's what they're willing to pay for. So, as long as I'm doing somewhat less bad than what somebody else is doing, they'll pretend that being less bad is good. I don't think something less bad is good. It's still bad, it's just less bad. What we should do is have the integrity to tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may.
Here are the 15 leading reasons Americans die, and a plant-based diet can help prevent nearly all of them, can help treat more than a half of them, in some cases even reverse the progression of disease.
For many, many years, there have been doctors who have said, if you're overweight, take out all the carbohydrate, or most of the carbohydrate from your diet for a while, and since that's half of what you're eating, you're going to lose weight. I mean, you take out all the potatoes and all the bread and all the fruit and all the beans and all the pasta, you'll lose weight.
The low-carb movement, they do see results, and that's why they're so successful. You do have initial results, but those results don't stick. And that's what's concerning about that.
You will lose weight. However, after a period of time, you say, this is like starvation. Can I bring these foods back? And the weight comes back, but worse. In that interim, if you're not eating all of those healthy foods, what are you eating? You're eating meat. You're eating heavy cream. And weight loss normally causes cholesterol levels to fall, but on these fatty, high cholesterol diets, sometimes people's cholesterols, despite the fact that they were losing weight kind of from semi-starvation, their cholesterols went up, sometimes way, way up. And when Dr. Atkins himself poor man. I mean, he died of an unfortunate accident. But then there was a big controversy, which I was in the middle of, where he had heart disease that he hid from people.
The Atkins Corporation, when I came out with my book against Low Carb Guide, sued me for libel. I was making libelous statements against Atkins. Saying his diet was bad. Of course, he dropped dead before they were able to carry out their lawsuit, and they went bankrupt 4 months after the book came out. So they weren't able to. But I published the attorney letter online with a point-by-point rebuttal. So I encourage the meat and junk food industry to sue me. I could use the extra traffic.
I don't know what the real motivation of people who tell dangerous, dishonest messages are. But what they're saying is dangerous and dishonest. And you can look at it from the cruelty of the animals point of view, from the environmental point of view, from the human health point of view. Any viewpoint you want to look at it, it's dangerous, dishonest, wrong, and harmful.
People love hearing bad news about the good news about their bad habits. So, that's how you sell magazines. Butter is back, something like that. But you're selling the public short. The public deserves and needs to know that there is a consensus among the nutrition scientific community going back decades about the foundations of healthy eating and healthy living, and that is more whole plant foods like more fruits and vegetables, and minimize their intake of animal foods and processed junk.
The reality is that there's a lot of people that sometimes are well-intentioned, misguided idiots, and oftentimes they're in a position of power politically or involved in organizations that can be a real pain and really disturbing. And it's not. And the part of the problem is it's not that they're evil people; they're just really stupid or really misguided. And as a consequence, they make decisions that are unfortunate. There's also people that know full well what the truth is, but their own financial vested interests are so powerful that they really aren't willing to admit up to it.
People often do things that they maybe in their heart of hearts wouldn't do, but for the money. And I think about people that work in a slaughterhouse. I'm sure they would rather have another job. These are the lowest paid workers in the world, people that work in McDonald's. I bet you that if they felt they could, or if their skills, they'd rather, people unfortunately do things for money.
The low carb movement keeps coming back over and over again in different faces, and each of them swears, "Oh no, I'm not like the last low carb. No, we tweak it a little bit. No, but I mean they're very similar manifestations, and of course they sell lots of books. Because any book that says bacon is good for you is going to sell a lot of books. But what troubles me is, this isn't an academic debate. This isn't an academic discussion. Who's right, who's wrong? It's people are going to listen to these and actually hurt themselves, hurt their families. People are going to die. What's their number one cause of death? Number two cause of death? Go down the list. These are largely diet-related diseases, and to tell people to eat these kind of diets that it's not that it's not based on science. The science is the opposite. This is not the Dr. Greger diet versus the Dr. Atkins diet. It's the science. It's centuries of science versus the latest fad that someone wants to sell books over. And it's ironic to me that, the foundation of these theories tend to be that, carbs are bad because they increase insulin production. And insulin, having high levels of insulin associated with cancer, associated with lots of bad things. But, meat is insulinogenic. There's a paper by, Holt and colleagues, 1997, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, called, in fact, you can look it up, it's probably free by now, Insulin Index of Foods, and it says you eat this much of, and they went through about 50 different foods, and eating beef causes a greater spike in insulin than white potatoes and white pasta and white rice. More insulin, and if that's the villain, right? Then you'd stay away from the meat. Even using their own framework, you would eat the opposite thing.
Okay, so I'm always a little uncomfortable when I share that video with a group because I don't really like to use the word fat. I like overweight, but you know, this was not my video, but at the same time, I just have to tell you, it's not a word that I use on a regular basis about the people I interact with or about anybody who's trying to lose weight. But you know, it's a concept, it's a part of our culture, and whatever words you want to use, if you look at those authors, I know I followed one of them, the Zone Diet man. I really never had the concept of looking at what he actually looked like. And probably at the time that I was doing the Zone, I probably thought that was normal weight because that's what our population normally looks like. And so, you know, this was a video that tries to bring home the point that you really want to be wary of what you're reading and what your resources are when you choose to change your diet. Any thoughts on this? Low carb?
And I kind of mentioned it last week too. I think it's a good point to drive home is what Dr. Greger said in that last video about this is not an academic discussion we're having here about that. That's, you know, it's just what's popular culture and different books. And like another analogy I like to use is, you know, it's kind of like when somebody, I always use T. Colin Campbell as an example because, you know, he's a nutritional biochemist for 50 plus years. So he's a good example of an academic in nutrition. He's been doing nutritional science for 50 plus years. And so when he was to write a book like the China study, and here's what the science says, and to treat and prevent cancer, mostly plant-based diet, blah, 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 the whole shebang. He's kind of from that camp, but that's again what the science says. And then then there's another book that's, let's say, Atkins writes, or whoever, just insert other, you know, another diet guru or something, and says, okay, you should eat a low carb diet. This is a doctor too, and he wrote a book to say to eat low carb diet. So kind of the lay public, all of us out there, everyone out there, kind of looks at those as, well, this is their opinion, this is the other doctor's opinion. So that's, you know, it's like, you know, they're on an equal playing field. It's like, no, they're not on an equal playing field. One doctor went to medical school and doesn't know anything about nutrition, you know, kind of maybe did a little bit of their own research and has this opinion they formulated, like I talked about last week, kind of did it backwards like I did. I have this opinion. Here's some studies that kind of, whether they're good studies or not, that kind of formulate my opinion and why I wrote this book. When on the other hand, T. Colin Campbell, who's an actual academic nutritional scientist, who's done decades of research, original research, he's a whole nother playing field. So it's kind of like saying, you know, if you guys are NFL fans, you know, Bill Belichick is a really famous NFL football coach for the New England Patriots, right? So it's kind of like me saying, oh, I'm a football fan. I like to watch lots of NFL football games. I'll write a book on how to coach an NFL team. And you'll put that up next to Bill Belichick, who wrote a book on coaching in the NFL. Who's the more credible person? Me, that just watches lots of football, or Bill Belichick, that's actually the coach? So it's kind of like the exact same analogy. It's like everyone looks at that as an equal playing field when it's Dr. X and the other PhD in academic nutrition, and they don't realize that that's not even close to being on the same playing field. Just like I wouldn't have any credibility writing a book about coaching in an NFL team compared to Bill Belichick. So that's just another analogy. I think that it's really important to, when we're talking about diet wars like this, and I wanted to make sure you understood, you know, this is not an academic conversation we're having. We're delving in emotion and culture and social stratosphere here, and different books that people read and opinions people have. When we're actually just looking at nutritional science and the academics of nutrition, there really is no debate. It is a mostly 90-95% whole food plant-based diet that the science supports worldwide. So just I'll get off my soapbox now. That's just I think an important thing to discuss for this particular topic.
Yes, it is. Thank you for that. Anybody else have anything you'd like to add?
Well, if you can stand listening to Stephen Gunn. For some reason, I can't pronounce his name.
Gundry.
Gundry. You listen on and on and on about how gut bacteria is so important and about how carbs are not, and then you find out all he's doing is selling supplements.
Yeah.
It's pretty disappointing. Oh, and he shows this beautiful, I think it's in Texas. He has a beautiful clinic. It's all his. And now we know what he does with all that money from the supplements.
Yeah.
He builds a beautiful clinic.
Yes.
Oh, another thing, I do, it's hard not to talk about what you're doing, especially when you lose 75 pounds. And but everybody asks you, well, how'd you do that? Well, I went on a plant-based diet, and they don't, most people just don't seem to know there's a difference between a keto diet, a paleo diet, and a plant-based diet. It's just nuts. Everybody thinks all three are good diets.
Yeah.
But I lost 75 pounds doing this, not the other ones.
So someone says I struggle with peer pressure, people pleasing, and saying no. This is one of my main struggles to stay plant-based. Yeah, we've all dealt with that peer pressure. And when I first started, there were people who were, don't you want to eat this donut? And don't you want to eat this and that? And don't you want the chicken sandwich? And here, try this. And, you know, and your family and friends. And let me tell you, our kids were ticked off at us for the first several years. You know, don't tell us what to do. You know, if you want to get sick on your own, you can do that. You're not going to get a lot of support from friends, family, and coworkers, but that's going to change. That's going to change as more and more people go through classes like these. And especially the younger people in this world are starting to understand the environmental effects. And so just give it a little bit more time and bring food with you, you know, so eat food before you go to other places. Don't depend on other people to provide you with food, and try to ignore some of that peer pressure. Anybody else have any suggestions?
It's interesting how we support a couple Humane Society organizations. And it's now that we support one or two, we get letters from 20. But this is an interesting, we just got, it's Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And it says the first thing you can do is sign petitions. And the second thing you can do to help stop animal cruelty is to test drive a healthier plant-based diet and sign up for the 21-day vegan kickstart at blah, blah, blah. Not only will you lower the risk of developing chronic diseases, but you'll save thousands of animal lives. I know we talk about this all the time, but I only brought that up because it is an extremely popular concept. And you're right. It's changing fast. And the fact that we're getting deluged with this information shows it. We're changing. I'm all about raising animals. It's been my life, but you know, I don't like feedlots. So there you go. It's I offend people I offend people in my world when they find out that I'm not eating meat.
You are a moral man.
I made a living teaching people how to raise livestock. And I'm not sorry. I think livestock have a big, important place to play in using the resources of our planet, but I don't like the way we do it. So I'm glad to be a part of this.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Ken. Appreciate it. All right, I've got 17 more minutes of video for you. I just want to get it in, and then we'll have some questions at the end, and then we'll carry on with questions in next week. We're going to get into now the vegan diet or Mediterranean diet I'm going to just play a portion of this next video by Neil Bernard. And I always love listening to Neil Bernard. It's vegan diet or Mediterranean diet, which is healthier.
Thanks again for joining us. Mediterranean diets, they're healthy, they're in the news all the time. How do they compare to other kind of diets, and is there a little bit of mythology in all of this? What I thought I might do is talk about Mediterranean diets and contrast them with vegan diets and other diets. And I think what we're going to see is that it's not one versus the other, they overlap in big ways. But let's have a look. A vegan diet means that you're eating fruits and grains and legumes and vegetables, and it can be interpreted in all different ways. A vegan diet means grains and fruits and vegetables, legumes, could have nuts and seeds, but it excludes animal products. And that could be an Italian meal, obviously. That could be Mexican with beans and rice and veggie fajitas. It could be interpreted through Chinese cuisine. So vegan is not a cuisine, obviously. It's not a part of the world. It just means certain things are excluded. It could be Japanese. Now, a Mediterranean diet actually means I'm driving down the coast of Tuscany and I don't really care what I eat because it's just so darn beautiful here. And the notion of a Mediterranean diet as a term was coined by Ansel Keys, who was at the University of Minnesota. And one February morning, he looked out of his window thinking, why am I here? And he thought, wouldn't it be nice to be in southern Italy? And found through some really innovative research at the time that diet made a big difference in whether you lived or died from cardiovascular disease. And Italy did not do the best, but it was pretty good. If you see on this graph, Japan had the lowest degenerative heart disease death rates. Italy was second. So the idea of the Mediterranean diet was born to look at the diets of that region. Now, the Mediterranean region is vast. It includes all of North Africa, parts of the Middle East, and all across the bottom of Europe. But what Keys had in mind was really southern Italy and its neighbors to the east and to the west, so Greece, France, and maybe parts of Spain. And the diet has had all different kinds of meanings, but it has been codified to mean lots of plant foods, not so much processing. Dessert is not going to be pudding, it'll be fruit. If you use fat, it would be olive oil. Dairy products are low, eggs are low, meat is low. And wine is consumed in low to moderate amounts. One thing is important. When Keys was using archetypal Italian villages to design what the diet meant, he was looking at a place called Nicotera in particular. The fat content of their diet was 23% of calories. So, in other words, relatively low. For all those people who imagine that a Mediterranean diet means opening up a bottle of olive oil and drowning your food in it, their fat content was much less than ours is here in North America. Okay, so the basics. Let's go back and just talk about what are we trying to get a diet to accomplish. With regard to heart disease, of course, the higher your cholesterol level, the higher your risk of dying of coronary disease. And so what makes your cholesterol go up? Well, saturated fat, the solid fat, every 1% rise in your saturated fat intake will lead to roughly a 2% rise in LDL. And despite the egg industry trying to make cholesterol look okay, dietary cholesterol does contribute to plasma cholesterol as well. So which foods have them? And if you look at animal products, and if you contrast them with plant products, you see something quite dramatic. Animal products have cholesterol, and they have a substantial amount of saturated fat. Plant products have no cholesterol and are extraordinarily low in saturated fat in most cases. By the way, let's take a look at Chinook salmon. You see that up there? For all the people who imagine that wild-caught salmon is somehow low in saturated fat or low in cholesterol, it's much more like beef than it is like broccoli. Okay, now what about things that we wish our foods did have, like fiber or vitamin C? So animal products are not plant-derived. They don't have fiber. They don't have vitamin C, but you see lots of it in plant foods, lots of fiber, lots of vitamin C, and other antioxidants as well. Okay, so there have been a number of clinical trials on plant-based diets, and Dean Ornish did his elegant studies, and although he described them yesterday, I want to just go back over some of the really key points. He wanted to see if we could not prevent heart disease, but reverse it with a 4-step program of vegetarian foods, half-hour walk, managing stress, which is why no physicians were in the study, avoid tobacco, and after a year, the experimental group had a massive drop in total cholesterol and in LDL compared to an untreated control, or a usual care control group. Their weight loss was impressive despite the fact that there was no calorie counting. And what made medical history was angiographic evidence that the arteries were opening up. And you could see this in a year's time with no medication in 82% of patients. A similar trial was done in India to see if in a very different population you could have similar results. So in northwest India, in Rajasthan, the Mount Abu open heart trial began. Patients with moderate to severe coronary atherosclerosis, and they were given a vegetarian diet that was near vegan, and exercise and stress management was part of it as well. And then they asked the people, no use of medication. Challenging to do that nowadays since everyone is on vitamin L, but nonetheless, when the researchers did angiography at baseline and at 2 years, they then separated the results based on adherence to the program. And the high adherers had a 91% of the high adherers had regression of their lesions. The low adherers, only 12%. And if you look at how many of them had lesions regressing more than 10%, that was 51% of them in the high adherence group. And then if you looked at the average percent diameter change, it was 18 absolute percentage points in the high adherers. This is like really nice result. So a Mediterranean diet has been tested for primary prevention, and you heard about the Predimed trial, but let me walk you through the weeds on what the trial was attempting to do. It occurred in Spain starting in 2003, and it was a big trial and very carefully put together, more than 7,000 participants. And the average person was overweight. The average person was 67 years old, and they were split into 3 groups. One group got a Mediterranean diet, in a minute I'll tell you what that meant to them, plus olive oil. And the idea is the olive oil is going to be healthy for you. And they asked them to have 50 grams of olive oil a day, about 4 tablespoons. But what they actually did was they delivered to each participant a liter of olive oil per week. So they made sure that nobody was low on olive oil. The next group got the Mediterranean diet, but instead of olive oil, they were asked to have nuts, roughly an ounce a day or 30 grams. And then the third group was the control group, okay? So 3 groups. And then what the Mediterranean diet itself was oil, nuts, fruits, vegetables, fish, legumes. There's a tomato sauce that's popular in Spain called sofrito, and wine for people who drank wine. And they asked them not to have sodas or baked goods or fatty spreads like margarine, butter, and to favor white meat over red meat, but they weren't necessarily pushing meat. So this is what people actually ate. And let me interpret this for you. The yellow bars, that's the group that was given the olive oil. And the brown bars are the group that was asked to eat nuts. And the white are the control group. So you can see the yellow bars on the far left. The extra virgin olive oil intake went way up in the group that was asked to eat extra virgin olive oil. But they reduced their risk of refined oils. So it wasn't that oily of a diet. They were eating the olive oil they were given and not using other oils. You'll notice that their vegetable intake went up in all the groups. Fruit intake went up in all the groups. Fish went up a little bit. Meat went down. Dairy went down. And lest we imagine that the Mediterranean diet is all red wine all the time, alcohol did not go up. Okay, so this is 3 months in. Let me show you the end of the study. Pretty much the same. olive oil way up in the olive oil group, nuts up in the nuts group, but meat and dairy down in both, and alcohol not really emphasized. All right, so what happened? Well, weight loss didn't really work out so well. They lost about, this is the first 3 months of the study, they lost about, what, 1/4 kilogram? And 90% of the participants were overweight. And to be on a special diet and to be monitored this way, they only lost about 1/4 kilogram. And then when they looked at did you die, this is all-cause mortality, and you do see a suggestion of a benefit for the olive oil group, but the p-value there, 0.15, it's nowhere near significance. And then how about do you die of cardiovascular disease? Once again, a suggestion of a benefit for the oil group, but there was so much variability that the p-value was just not significant. So this couldn't be differentiated from a chance result. But after about 5 years, if you did a composite of did you have a myocardial infarction or stroke or did you die from cardiovascular disease, the control group, 4.4%, olive oil group, 3.8%, the nut group, 3.4%. Okay, we're at least getting somewhere. And that was it. That was the headline, that you got this rather modest reduction from this composite endpoint. Now, I'm not saying it's bad or a poorly done study, but some people were disappointed that they couldn't get more out of it.
So bottom line, you don't see a lot of difference, and it might be better to be adding nuts to one's diet than olive oil because you get a better reduction in heart attack, stroke, and death. So I want to leave this study for a moment and go on to the last video that I wanted to share with you, and that is a Flashback Friday, improving on the Mediterranean diet.
The traditional Mediterranean diet can be considered as a mainly, but not exclusively, plant-based diet, and certainly not a whole food plant-based diet, as olive oil and wine can be considered essentially fruit juices. Even if one is eating a vegetarian diet, an entirely plant-based version, there are a number of potentially problematic nutritional aspects that are rarely talked about. For example, lots of white bread, white pasta, not a lot of whole grains. Alcohol can be a problem. The caloric density with all that oil can be high, as well as the salt intake. Let's go over these one by one. In this anatomy of the health effects of the Mediterranean diet, while the single most important component was the high consumption of plant foods, in contrast, high cereal consumption, meaning high grain consumption, did not appear to help. This may be because most grains modern Mediterranean dieters eat are refined, like white bread, whereas the traditional Mediterranean diet was characterized by unprocessed cereals, in other words, whole grains. And while whole grains have been associated with a lower risk of diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, refined grains may increase the risk of diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and other chronic diseases. For example, in the Predimed study, those who ate the most white bread, but not whole grain bread, gained significant weight. Alcohol may also be a problem. As a plant-centered diet, no surprise adherence to a Mediterranean diet is associated with lower cancer risk, but not with lower breast cancer risk. With all the fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, beans, and low saturated fat, you'd assume there'd be a lower breast cancer risk. But alcohol is a known breast cancer risk factor, even moderate amounts. So if you create a special adapted version of the Mediterranean diet score that excludes alcohol, the diet does appear to reduce breast cancer risk then. The wonderful grape phytonutrients in red wine can improve our arterial function, such that if you drink de-alcoholized red wine with the alcohol removed, you get a significant boost in endothelial function, the ability of our arteries to relax and dilate normally, increasing blood flow. But if you drink the same red wine with the alcohol added back in, it abolishes the beneficial effect. It counteracts the benefit of the grape phytonutrients, so better just to eat grapes. Similarly, there are components of olives, the antioxidant phytonutrients that may help endothelial function. But when consumed as oil, even extra virgin olive oil may impair arterial function. So even if white bread dipped in olive oil is the very symbol of the Mediterranean diet, we can modernize it by removing oils and refined grains. Another important, albeit frequently ignored, issue in the modern Mediterranean diet is sodium intake. Despite evidence linking salt intake to high blood pressure, heart disease, and strokes, dietary salt intakes in the U.S. is on the rise. Right now, we get about 7 to 10 grams a day, mostly from processed foods. If we were to decrease that just by 3 grams, which is about 1,000 milligrams of sodium, half a teaspoon of table salt every year, we could save tens of thousands of people from having a heart attack, prevent tens of thousands of strokes, and tens of thousands of deaths. There's a common misconception that only certain people should reduce their salt intake, and that for the vast majority of the population, salt reduction is unnecessary. But in reality, the opposite is true. But there's much we can learn from the traditional Mediterranean diet. A defining characteristic of the Mediterranean diet is an abundance of plant foods. One thing that seems to have fallen by the wayside: no real Mediterranean meal is replete without lots of greens, a key part of not only a good Mediterranean diet, but of any good diet. What accounts for the benefits of a Mediterranean-style diet? An Anatomy of Health Effects was published, and the single most important component was the high consumption of plant foods. In contrast, fish and seafood consumption, the only animal foods promoted in the Mediterranean diet, did not seem to help. In fact, if you look at the 4 major dietary quality scoring systems, which have all been associated with extending lifespan and lowering heart disease and cancer mortality, they all share only 4 things in common: more fruit, more vegetables, more whole grains, and more nuts and beans. They're all built on a common core of a diet rich in plant foods, whereas opposite food patterns, rich in animal foods, poor in plant-based foods, in other words, the Western diet, is associated with higher risks. So we need to optimize the food environment to support whole grains, vegetables, fruit, and plant-based proteins. That's one of the things all the so-called blue zones have in common, the longest living populations. Not only social support and engagement, daily exercise, but nutritionally, they all center their diet around plant foods, reserving meat mostly for special occasions. And the population with perhaps the longest life expectancy in the world doesn't eat any meat at all, the California Adventist vegetarians. So if the primary benefits of the Mediterranean diet are due to all the whole plant foods, what if you went back to the famous Predimed study and created a pro-vegetarian scoring system? We know vegetarians live longer, but because a pure vegetarian diet might not easily be embraced by many individuals, maybe it would be easier to swallow if we just tell people, look, more plant-based foods, less animal-based foods. But would just moving along the spectrum towards more plants actually enable people to live longer? They thought of this food pattern as a gentle approach to vegetarianism, figuring that if it improved survival, it would be an easily understandable message for health promotion. More plant foods, less animal foods. So you get points for eating fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, beans, olive oil, and potatoes, but get docked points for any animal fats, eggs, fish, dairy, or any type of meat or meat products. Of course, that means you get a higher score the more potato chips and French fries you eat. That's why I prefer the term whole food plant-based diet, since it's defined by what you eat, not by what you don't eat. When I was teaching up at Cornell, I'd have vegan students apparently living off of French fries and beer. Vegan does not necessarily mean health-promoting. But did it work? Regardless of healthy versus unhealthy, if you give points to people for any kind of plant food, processed or not, and detract points for any kind of animal product consumption, do people with higher scores live longer? Yes. The maximum pro-vegetarian score is 60, but even just scoring 40 or more was associated with a 40% drop in mortality. In fact, there were so few deaths in the highest category of adherence to the pro-vegetarian diet, they had to merge the 2 upper categories for their analysis. This is evidence that simple advice to increase the consumption of plant-derived foods with reductions in the consumption of foods from animal sources confers a survival advantage, a live a longer life advantage. This modest change is realistic, affordable, and achievable because a sizable proportion of their population was already eating that way, so one can get a significant survival benefit without a radical shift to the exclusive consumption of plant foods, a more gradual and gentle approach more easily translatable into public policy. For example, a 41% drop in mortality rates in the United States would mean saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans every year.
So with that, I'm going to stop the share, and we're going to come back to the group and see if we can answer any questions. I hope that you listen carefully to his explanation about just because you eat vegan doesn't mean that you're necessarily eating healthy, that you can eat along this spectrum, and the more you eat toward more plants and less animal products, the more health benefit you'll receive. You don't have to do it 100%, but I want to remind any of you who are like wondering, do I have to do 100%? Well, if you are not getting the benefits that you want, like you're not losing weight, or you're not controlling your blood pressure, or your diabetes is out of control, then you might want to consider doing that experiment on your body for a couple months and see the benefits, and that might help convince you. Any other thoughts, Scott, before we get questions, or what?
No, just a reminder that next week we'll have the open forum for nutritional myths and other popular diets and the diet wars all together. So it'd be good because there's probably a lot of questions related to all the different myths that we talked about last week, as well as just talk about all the different diets, and it brings up lots of questions. So I'm glad we'll dedicate next week to that.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions about tonight or anything?
What do you consider a healthy body fat percentage?
We generally go by the BMI, and BMI of between 19 and 25 is usually considered a healthy body weight based upon your height and overall weight. There can be slight variations depending on your muscle mass and body build, but that's sort of the goal that we're shooting for the general population.
There is like body fat, women tend to be 25 to 30%, men 15 to 20, 25%. So there is, there are some general recommendations there, and then waist size and things, waist circumference. And then there's also, visceral fat is a big issue too. So the fat how your fat is distributed also plays an important role. So somebody might be 30% body fat, but they have most of the fat in their hips or thighs or butt, which has less association with health problems, metabolic health, than if you have the fat around the center, the apple versus the pear. So there are some differences in a whole discussion about body fat, and there are people that have a body mass index that's normal, like say it's 22 or 23, which is in the normal range for a BMI, but then they're metabolically fat. So they have lots of visceral body fat, and so then they still have insulin resistance and lots of health problems. And there are people that have type 2 diabetes because of all the insulin resistance, and even though they have a normal body mass index, it's not, you don't see it as often, but that's an issue too. So it brings up it's a very complicated topic as far as fat distribution, where the fat is, the percent of body fat, the BMI. But like Charlie said, in general, when we look at a patient, are they healthy weight or not? BMI is still kind of the best tool we have for that, but there are other issues with that.
How can you get tested, and how much does it cost to see where your fat is, or if you have too much visceral fat.
Yeah, I mean, so overall body fat, you can do, there's the water tank test is a good one. You can get the percentage. Sometimes the scales that can be fairly accurate, what percent of body fat you have. That's another tool. But as far as visceral body fat, there's something called a SPECT scan. So it's a magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So MR SPECT scan, of course, very expensive. And that can show you where the body fat is distributed, so you can see if they have that visceral fat or not. But in general, it's used mainly for research purposes, not for the general population. But that's how you can usually tell. But if somebody has insulin resistance, they likely have some visceral fat.
There are some like a CT scan can sometimes show significant visceral fat, but it's generally pretty obvious by looking at people without having to do a expensive scan with the radiation connected with that. Sometimes ultrasound can pick up a fatty liver, which is a sort of non-invasive test. If I were to screen someone for fat, I'd be concerned about, are they accumulating fat in their liver? It's reported pretty regularly when we do ultrasounds of the upper abdomen. And that way we can warn patients that they need to start doing something about it if it's reported as visceral fat. So, but Scott's right, it's generally the SPECT scans are usually in research, and I don't think any insurance is going to pay for it. You'd have to pay out of pocket. It'd be pretty spendy, I suspect.
So another question in the chat about nutrients being destroyed with cooking, and for the most part, no. And Dr. Greger does have a whole host of videos on that very topic. And in general, we recommend you do a nice, maybe a 50-50 mixture of raw versus cooked vegetables, just for the variety. But even that being said, we always say, and Dr. Greger always says, eat the vegetables however you'll eat the most of them. Whether it's if you prefer to eat, you'd eat a lot more broccoli or cauliflower if it's steamed, then eat it that way. If you like certain foods raw, then eat it that way too. So however you like to eat it.
There are a couple veggies which Greger makes a deal out of. One of them is broccoli. And if you just cook the broccoli, you destroy the enzyme which converts the chemical into sulforaphane. And so you want to add a pinch of mustard powder if you refuse to eat any raw broccoli. So that's one. And then garlic is another one that if you want to chop it up and let it rest for maybe 15 minutes before you cook it, because the enzyme gets destroyed. And so, or you could just eat a pinch of raw garlic if you don't want to let your garlic rest before you cook it. Any chance the walking group will come back at U of O? Sounds like an excellent idea. Are you going to start it and tell us when? We'll see if we have the time. We can make it. Perhaps make it a walk with a doc or walk with a provider session. I think it's an excellent idea.
Yeah, at our Eugene Plant-Based Providers Group, we're planning to, we have a meeting this coming weekend. We're going to try to start organizing some community events, but obviously we've had to kind of put those things on hold during the pandemic. But I'm hopeful that this summer we'll be able to do things like that. Do walks, maybe take a group, people grocery shopping, to do some food label reading stuff. Maybe we could do a potluck, or that'd be great. Get back to that kind of stuff. But yeah, time will tell.
So I'm going to take one last look at the gallery and see if there's anybody who's raising their hand or like, hey, I got to say something here. Time to speak up before we end the meeting. and see if there's any of you who have any thoughts about anything before we carry on to next week. Okay, Mary, you saying goodbye?
Yeah, I have a question for you. Neil Barnhart he made a comment one time about cheese, and I didn't catch exactly what he said, and I've been looking for it ever since. Any ideas?
A comment about cheese?
He made a comment about cheese, like it was like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, you could get his book, The Cheese Trap. And he will talk to you about the pus that's in milk. He'll talk to you about the amount of saturated fat, the insulin, like growth factor 1, that hormone that stimulates growth of cancer. He'll talk to you about the estrogen from the pregnant cows. He'll talk to you about the slaughter of baby calves because, you know, they're taken away from their mother and made into veal, and you'll just not like to hear about it. He'll tell you about all those things.
Well, I don't need to be convinced not to eat cheese. I was just curious what his comment was.
Yeah. Well, the funniest thing I remember him saying about cheese is he says, you know, cheese is addicting because how could something that smells like a dirty sock be something you want to eat?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that might be.
Yeah, but The Cheese Trap is one of his latest on that topic.
I'll check it out. Thanks.
Good deal.
Thanks.
Thank you all for coming. Lisa, good to see you here again. Had a talk with one of your classmates for an hour and 10 minutes to introduce her to the topic, and it was good. So we just are gonna keep at, actually it was a class after you. So it wasn't your classmate, but compadre in crime.
Sounds good. I'm glad.
Okay, well, we keep trying to recruit. Good to see you anyway. All right, everybody. Until the next time.
Good night.
Thank you.
Welcome.